What is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. In today's review, we are going to be taking a look at the Hifiman Deva. Now, before we hop on into today's review, I just have to give a disclaimer that this Deva was provided for review by Hifiman, but I am not paid or influenced in any way to say anything in particular about this headphone. I was just loaned this headphone in exchange for my honest opinion of it, and I will be returning it to Hifiman when I am finished. So once again, big thanks to Hifiman for sending the Deva here out for review. And with that out of the way, let's hop on into the review. Now, the Hifiman Deva is Hifiman's, I guess, new entry-level planar headphone. I think you can still buy like the 400i and the 4XX, but in terms of like modern Hifiman products, this is more or less the cheapest thing that they make in terms of a planar magnetic headphone. And this is coming in at a $299 price point. And this is also a Bluetooth headphone, which is quite interesting, that we will talk about in just a bit. But let's go ahead and get basic specs out of the way. The Hifiman Deva is coming in at a $299 MSRP. It is using an 18 ohm planar magnetic driver with a sensitivity of 93.5 dB a milliwatt, a frequency response of 20 to 20,000 hertz, and a weight of 360 grams. All right, so sorry about the little bit excessive background noise during the recording of this. It just started raining, but we will work through it. That's the life of a YouTuber. But anyway, moving on into the build of the Deva here. So the Deva is honestly better built than most things that Hifiman has made recently, in my opinion. It has a very thick padded headband here. Instead of a more typical suspension style headband of Hifiman's, but it ends up working. It's covered in like this brownish protein leather. Moving down here, you have full metal yokes, which is nice because Hifiman has a poor track record with plastic. And it actually swivels. Thank you, Hifiman. The Sundara, the Ananda, and all other ones that use that new headband do not swivel, and I really dislike that. And I'm really happy to see that we have a swivel on this headphone. We have a plastic cup here and a plastic grill, and we have a hybrid pad that seems to be more or less like what the Sundara is using, just in a brown color instead of black, and you can kind of see the Planar driver through the covering here underneath of the pad. So the Deva feels decently well built. It's pretty light. I wouldn't say it feels super premium, but for $299, I would say it definitely feels up to par. So the build on the Deva is quite decent for its price point for sure. And then moving on into comfort, the Deva I actually find pretty comfortable. I was surprised. Not using a suspension headband, but the curvature of the headband is pretty well done. It's fairly well padded, and the headphone is not excessively heavy. So it is fairly comfortable for me. My ears don't really hit inside of it. I like the padding. It doesn't clamp overly too hard. And yeah, overall, I think it is a pretty comfortable headphone, and I think most people will not have too much issue with it. So good job on the comfort here of the Deva. Okay, so now let's hop on into included accessories. In the box, you get this very poor, in my opinion, 3.5mm auxiliary cable, which Hifiman cables I've never much been a fan of. This one is super stiff and kind of springy. I really don't like this. It terminates in a 4-pin on this side to a standard 3-pole on the other side. In the box, you also get a USB-C cable for charging, and charging is because this headphone has a Bluetooth adapter. So now we have to spend a bit of time talking about this headphone as a Bluetooth headphone. So the Deva can be run fully passively. You just plug in a standard 3.5mm auxiliary cable on the headphone, or you can quickly switch it into Bluetooth mode by taking said included Bluetooth adapter and clicking it on, And then you have this. Now, feedback of this Bluetooth adapter thing here. I don't think it looks very good. First of all, it's black. It really should have been painted silver to match the headphone. Not that it would have looked particularly great even if they would have made it silver, but it would have looked better than this big black thing hanging off of the headphone here. So yeah, I don't think this looks particularly great with the Bluetooth adapter hanging off of it. For something that was targeted more for consumers, and they're obviously going for looks with this color scheme, is very atypical for Hifiman, and the general shape and everything is definitely going more for a consumer thing that you can be seen in. I feel like this thing kind of ruins that overall look. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of how it looks. Now I get why they did it. It's because acoustically it is better to have all these electronics outside of the cups, because once you start putting amps and stuff in the cup, it can cause like issues with some of the acoustics, because you have stuff in there messing with the driver and whatnot. So acoustically it does make more sense to have it outside, but man, it doesn't look very good. And Hifiman can put amps inside the cups of Bluetooth headphones. The Ananda BT does, but it seems for this price and at this size, they cannot work this into the headphone. So that is kind of how it looks there. It is something you have to decide if you are willing to make that sacrifice. So now this headphone as a Bluetooth headphone, it works quite well. You just hold the button to turn it on, enters pairing mode. You pair it to Bluetooth with your phone, your player, or your computer, whatever you want. And yeah, it works fine as a Bluetooth headphone. I have no real complaints. I haven't used it enough to the point where it has died, so I'm not entirely sure what the battery life is, but it seems to be pretty decent. I would guess probably a couple hours, probably like 3 to 4 hours would be my guess, but don't quote me on that. And yeah, overall functionality, it's fine. It definitely works well as a Bluetooth headphone. You also can plug this in via USB. So if you do not have a DAC amp, you also can use this wire just as a USB headphone. And there is a microphone on this, which we will be doing a microphone test of it in just a bit. So that is quite nice to have if you are in the market for a open back planar headphone, which of note, I've never really understood the whole open back planar wireless thing. I get maybe some people say that, you know, they want to walk around their house listening to music with no wires or having to deal with, you know, a player or something like that, which makes sense. I get that use case, but I really don't see anybody going out in public with this. I'm sure there's people out there that do, but you know, they were obviously targeting this more for people that want to go out in public and be seen in it with the looks, which again, I don't know who's going to use open back planar in public, because this thing does leak a lot. But if you're one of those people, this thing is out there for you and you can use it as such. Now, one more thing to note here of this Bluetooth thing, the amp does not have any hiss, which is very nice, because hiss on Bluetooth headphones is annoying, and there was no hiss with this that I noticed. Okay, so here we are testing the microphone on the Hifiman Deva. I have no idea how this sounds until I listen back to this recording, but here is a general idea of what the Deva will sound like if you are using it as a microphone for, I don't know, phone calls or voice chat. So yeah, the Deva here is, I'm just going to say some random stuff here. So yeah, the Deva here is a quite comfortable headphone. Some people may find it fairly stylish. It is a cheap planar headphone, yada yada yada. So hopefully that will give you an idea of what the microphone sounds like on the Hifiman Deva. Now, as for power requirements, this thing can be powered perfectly fine off of its Bluetooth amp, but using it as a wired headphone, it is actually pretty hard to drive. It is low impedance, low sensitivity. Low impedance, low sensitivity means high current needed. And I was taking this thing way up on my Ragnarok, which is a very powerful amplifier. So this thing takes some juice to be used. portable. I don't think that you're going to be using it too much wired off 3.5 millimeter unless you have a source with quite a bit of current, because this thing takes a lot of current to get up and running. But the Bluetooth amp definitely powers it without any issue. So just something I thought I would note. Okay, so now let's hop on into the sound of the Hifiman Deva. Now, the Deva here, just of note before we hop into frequency response, I checked there is no DSP whatsoever in the Bluetooth module, so the sound and frequency response will be the same, both wired and wireless. So just something to note before we hop on into this. So starting off with frequency response, the Deva does not have very good bass extension for a planar headphone. It seems to roll off at around 60 hertz and seems to drop off maybe 7 or 8 dB by the time you hit 20 hertz. So it has a fairly substantial bass roll off for a planar headphone. After that, you have the typical jagged Hifiman lower mid-range in like the 6 to 800 hertz region. There's a couple of like weird little, some people, I guess you could call them ringing areas, where there's just like these little jaggies and little inconsistencies in the mid-range. After that, starting at around like 1.5K, your mid-range does start to dip out. That typical Hifiman, it's usually referred to as the Hifiman U shape, where you kind of have like the flat bass, but then your mid-range is kind of scooped out a little bit and then comes back up in the treble. You do have that here, but the mid-range is very, very odd sounding and very uneven. And you'll see it in the measurements, but it honestly sounds like this too. It's just like very funky sounding, very uneven, with like lots of little dips and peaks throughout it. And then your treble comes back up for, I'd say, maybe 2 to 3 dB over where your lower mids were. So a little bit elevated upper treble, but typical Hifiman signature more or less, but the mid-range on this is a lot more inconsistent and odd sounding than other headphones. So actually, let's talk about the areas of this headphone. So starting with the bass here. The bass, like I mentioned, rolls off. It's not very dynamic. This headphone sounds fairly compressed. It rolls off. Now, when I was listening to it, just something I wanted to note, I was listening to it, I'm like, why does this sound kind of bass boosted? And I figured out what it was. It was my glasses breaking the seal on it. And when you break the seal on a lot of Hifiman Planars, you get this like F0 resonance hump where the bass kind of comes up to like very elevated peak, and then it drops off. And you'll see this if you ever measure a Hifiman headphone and you break the seal, you get this kind of resonance hump. So I was having that happen, but once I pushed it to seal against my head, it went away. So just something to note. So yeah, this headphone is not a bassy headphone. It does roll off and the bass is somewhat compressed. Now the mid-range, like I mentioned, sounds very uneven and off. It's kind of thin, and there's no other way I can describe it than just strange. I was listening to it for a while, and I'm just like, why do these mids not sound quite right? And I've never heard a mid-range quite like this. It's a little thin, but it just sounds off. That's like there's no other way I can describe it. It just, something about it just sounds off. And then when I measured it, I saw like all the little squiggles or all the little jaggies, and I'm like, yeah, that would make sense. There's like weird little like resonance frequencies or ringing going on in the mids that just kind of make it just sound kind of off. And then the treble is elevated. I'd say it's decent enough. I don't really have much complaints about the treble on this headphone, but the mid-range just sounds kind of off and the bass rolls off, and it's not very dynamic or punchy. Now, as for detail, this headphone for $300, I would say is not quite there in terms of detail, and we will talk about it compared to the Sundara in just a bit. But it has definitely has a little bit of grain in the mid-range and in the treble. But it's not horribly low res or anything. Like, I'm not saying it's like super, super grainy, but it's not that great a detail for $300 in my opinion. And as I already mentioned, the dynamics overall are somewhat compressed and not that great overall. Although of planar headphones at this price point, that's about to be expected, so I'm not going to knock it too hard in terms of dynamics for it being a cheap planar headphone. Staging on it is, I would say, about average. It's not excessively wide. I'd say it's about an average stage, and the imaging is not spectacular either, because the mid-range sounds super funky and it just kind of obscures things for me, so I don't think it images particularly well. And as for timbre, it is quite plasticky. It does remind me a lot of like the older 400i or the HE4XX. It is a lot more plasticky in terms of timbre, and I think that mid-range funkiness throws the timbre off even more so than typical. So that is the overall sound characteristics of the Deva here. So now hopping on into comparisons here, let's talk about the Deva compared to the Sundara. So the Sundara is now only $350. I think it was $500 when I reviewed it, but now it is down to $350. Now, I've not heard the supposed new revision of the Sundara that everybody says is so much better than the old one. But even compared to the old Sundara that I reviewed, this thing is still definitely behind the Sundara for only $50 more. Now, the Sundara also did not extend the bass. It also was not very dynamic. But the Sundara had much more even and smoother mids than the Deva did. I think the Sundara also might have been a touch brighter from memory. I actually do have a graph comparing the two, so I will throw it up. But treble is, I'd say, fairly similar between the two. I think the Deva is lower resolution than the Sundara it was, and I also think it is a bit more plasticky. The Deva honestly reminds me a lot of the 400i. It sounds like the 400i with even a funkier mid-range, but maybe not quite as compressed or plasticky, but it sounds more like the new 400i or the 4XX than the Sundara to me, although I think it's a little bit better than the 4XX is. Now, I think also one of their rivals, if you don't care about the Bluetooth functionality, this is going to be the HD6XX. Personally, I am going to take the 6XX over the Deva just because much better tuning on this, better timbre, better tonality. Staging is obviously a little small. Everybody knows the 6XX staging. It's darker, but I'm going to take any of the Sennheiser 600 series over the Deva personally. So at the end of the day, why would you buy the Deva over the Sundara for $50 more? There's a couple reasons for this. The biggest one obviously is the Bluetooth. If you want a Bluetooth open back planar magnetic headphone for this price point, you have no other option. You really can only go with the Deva or some other planar headphone with like a FIO BTR5, but then you still have to deal with the cables. But if you want a truly wireless Bluetooth planar in this price point that's open back, then this is what you have to go with. Other reasons to take it over Sundara, I honestly think it's more comfortable. It doesn't have suspension, but it swivels, and I think it's lighter. I didn't look at the Sundara weight before recording this, but I think it's a little bit more comfortable, and it looks better than the Sundara does. Arguably, I know some people really don't like how the Deva looks. If you remove this, it definitely looks better. But if I was going to be seen in public with either the Sundara or the Deva, I would probably prefer to be seen in the Deva just because it doesn't have the big suspension headband that looks kind of funky out in public. But either than that, I really see no reason to take the Deva over the Sundara. The Sundara is a pretty good headphone. Everybody says the new version that I will review it at some point is whatever, so much better and improved. So I'm going to believe all those people, and I'm just going to say that I would recommend spending the $50 more for the Sundara if you only care about using it as a wired headphone, because like better detail, FR is a lot smoother. I think the stage is a little bit bigger. So overall, Sundara, I think, is a better option. And a lot of people really like the new Sundara. And it's a good headphone. I didn't dislike the old one I heard, but if the new one is what people are saying, then yeah, I think I will quite like the new Sundara. So if you want the Deva, you're going to need to be a very specific customer. And I guess also the Audeze Mobius, I guess you could also consider, because it's also a wireless planar, but it's closed back, it's a gaming headset. I don't know, there's a lot of, the Mobius is a very, very different product than this. I prefer them, actually would probably take the Mobius over this, but very, very different product. They don't really compare with each other. So that is basically my thoughts on the Hifiman Deva. Very, very interesting product that's aimed at a very, very specific customer, and I'm not sure how many of those people are out there. But if you're looking for something like this, this is really the only option that you have. But I'm just really not sure how many people are out there. It seems like quite a niche product to me. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the Hifiman Deva. Links of where to buy this in the description below, as well as my Twitter, the ears graph, and all other relevant information. Once again, thanks to Hifiman for sending the Deva out for review. Keep making products, guys. I know it may not seem like it sometimes, but I am generally a big fan of Hifiman products. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the review. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.